Thanks for joining us for this edition of Alaska Weather on Tuesday, February 8th, 2022. I'm David Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show once again. And up first, cold morning, actually cold afternoon as well. Some areas on the North Slope sitting at or just under 50 degrees below zero. Others well into the minus 40s up north of the Brooks Range. Actually, Anatuvik currently sitting at 40 degrees below zero, but morning lows minus 59 at Umiat, Dead Horse 51 below, and they're about that right now. Ugnu Kaparak, same thing, 51 below zero, and Sagwan currently at their low temperature of 50 degrees below zero. And has this weather graphic. Wind chill warning remains out tonight for the eastern Arctic coast, eastern North Slope into the eastern Alaska Range for wind chills to 70 below zero, and wind chill advisory for the western Arctic coast for tonight for wind chills of 40 to 55 below zero. Wind chill advisory is also out for the northwest coast and toward Kotzebue, Seward Peninsula coastline there into eastern Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island. Those are out for tonight for wind chills of 40 to 55 degrees below zero. Otherwise, in the interior, Koyukuk Valley down toward Tanana, upper Yukon Flats area, winter weather advisories are out, including the eastern Alaska Range for tonight into midday tomorrow for winds, snow, blowing snow, wind chills to 55 degrees below zero. And from there, looking at satellite image, you can see enormous area of Arctic air is spilled out and covering the entire Bering Sea, all of the Aleutian chain, picking up moisture as it blows off the ice edge, which is just northeast of the Pribilof Islands, picking up clouds and snow with snow showers extending down to the central and western Aleutians and kind of just areas of light snow for the Fox Islands into the Alaska Peninsula, especially on the Bering Sea side of things. Otherwise, you can see the moisture band lifting northward into the central interior. Brought snow earlier today to southern Alaska, pushing northward into the central interior. And that's not clouds on the North Slope. That's just the cold surface temperatures, mostly clear skies up there. And that's why it's showing up as clouds, because it's so cold. The satellite thinks it is looking at clouds. Anyway, for the southern panhandle, more moisture sliding up into that area there. And that ahead of a warm front, next surge of warm air and rain coming up with that feature, quite an extensive warm front there. Main frontal boundary occluded front and the triple point back to the west-southwest of south of Kodiak Island. We had one low track northward into Cook Inlet, already clearing out over Cook Inlet into the Susitna Valley this afternoon after the snow earlier, and that's pushed up areas of snow, central interior. Still windy through the passes of the Brooks Range there to the western Arctic coast, but not quite as windy through the Bering Strait and also St. Lawrence Island, looking at lighter winds with a weak low developing there along the Yukon Delta coast. Weak trough, light snow due to the very cold air moving off the ice edge there just south of, or near the Pribilofs. And areas of snow and snow showers that we saw in satellite extending all the way down and south of the Aleutian chain. For tonight, that pattern continues out over the Bering Sea, but winds continue to drop off and become lighter and more variable. So that'll result in a warming trend there for the Pribilofs. Probably won't fall back below zero tonight unless it should happen to clear out. But with the light winds, that's possible. But looks like it'll stay cloudy with areas of light snow that'll extend back up to St. Lawrence Island, to the Seward Peninsula, and also along the Brooks Range, areas of light snow, possibly blowing and drifting on the west side, but winds coming down up there as well. Next storm sliding northward just east of Kodiak Island. Look for winds to start to increase out of the north and northwest for Kodiak Island, so that'll make for a mixed precipitation pattern that should translate to just snow toward morning. Snow will be on the increase over south central Alaska, Prince William Sound, mixture along the eastern North Gulf Coast. Periods of rain kind of diminishing ahead of that next system as it pushes northward. We'll see for Wednesday That low tracks right up into Prince William Sound, and the next frontal boundary pushing another round of heavy wind and rain into the northern and central southeast coast, lighter amounts down to the south, and blowing snow possible for the western Alaska Range up into the Susitna Valley as colder air pulls back down behind that low with it tracking into Prince William Sound. The higher pressure and colder air out to the west there stays cold in the northern interior. Still some flurries and clouds will actually result in maybe warmer temperatures up there over the north slope to the eastern Arctic coast. Not much change out over the Bering Sea. Winds are become pretty light and variable there, maybe east-northeast, 15 to 25 miles per hour, Adak and Atka, but that's about it, with snow showers and cold air locked in place out there, and snowfall levels at the surface, at sea level, all the way well south of the Aleutians. And for the day, Thursday, we've got another front coming up and elongating out across the central Aleutians to the Alaska Peninsula. Look for snow to increase across the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, mixing with rain in the afternoon with that warmer southeast wind flow. Areas of light snow persisting or scattered snow showers over the southern southeast interior of the state. Otherwise, Arctic high pressure. Temperatures again well below zero throughout the day. North slope, Arctic coast into the central and western part of the state, St. Lawrence Island. Pretty cold, but winds on the light side, and probably looking at some pretty good afternoon sunshine. Panhandle could also see some afternoon clearing with that high building in over the southern areas with lingering snow showers up to the north. Lows tonight, again, 35 to 55 below zero for the north slope on out to the Arctic coast, and 15 to 30 below for the remainder of the interior, and 15 to 25 below for the lower Yukon River Valley, Kuskokwim, Yukon Delta areas. And lows in the mid-teens for the central Aleutians, upper teens for the Fox Islands, and 5 to 15 for the Alaska Peninsula. Kodiak Island, lower 20s there, anywhere from 10 to 20 below for your lows in Bristol Bay. Upper teens to mid-20s south central Alaska, about the same for the Copper River Basin. Mid to upper 30s over the northern Panhandle with lows lows in the lower 40s for the central and southern southeast coast. Look for highs 45 to 50 there for the central and southern Panhandle. Lower to mid 40s, hard to say. Lower to mid 40s for the highs for the northern southeast coast to Yakutat. Upper 20s Copper River Basin. In the 20s for south central Alaska. Near 30 for Kodiak Island with that colder northwest wind kicking in. Single numbers for Bristol Bay, north and west of the Alaska Range. Temperatures staying well below zero through Wednesday afternoon, especially the north slope out to the Arctic coast, with highs in the upper 20s for all of the Aleutians, lower teens for the Pribilofs. And then the lows Thursday morning, shaping up, staying well above freezing, pretty mild for the Panhandle, in the 30s to near 40. Otherwise, 10 to 20 for the Copper River Basin, 5 to 15 south central Alaska and the Susitna Valley with the colder air coming in from the west and northwest. Upper teens for Kodiak Island, 0 to 10 below for Bristol Bay for your lows, and 15 to 30 below for the central interior, and 30 to 40 below for the north slope on out to the Arctic coast, and lows 20 to 30 below St. Lawrence Island in toward the Seward Peninsula area. Single numbers should stay above zero for the Pribilofs Thursday morning, mid-teens for the central Aleutians, otherwise 20 to 25 for the Alaska Peninsula and the Fox Islands. Highs mid-30s Kodiak Island and 15 to 25 for south central Alaska, upper 20s toward Homer, Kachemak Bay, Prince William Sound, and upper 30s to lower 40s for the Panhandle. 5 below to 5 above for the central and eastern interior, and looking warmer up north there over the north slope, but still staying well below zero, and a little below zero there for the southwest interior, especially the Yukon Delta.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather, we've got a band of IFR from the northern Bering Sea. There's St. Matthew Island up across Savunga Gamble. Northeastward across the Seward Peninsula, Kotzebue Sound, and up along the Brooks Range down into the Yukon Flats. Some VFR over the central interior, southwest part of the state, VFR into Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula. Aleutians, VFR, southern Bering Sea marginal. And then quite an area of IFR now up into Cook Inlet and along the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range on up to southern approach of Windy Pass, Prince William Sound, much of the Kenai Peninsula, all IFR, including the North Gulf Coast, and the Panhandle, although becoming marginal VFR late tonight for the central and southern coastal areas. And then for the afternoon, not much change for the southeast coast, pretty solid IFR, and same thing for the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound. Turning an arm, Arm and the Manuska Valley, Talkeetna's IFR, extending northward into the greater Fairbanks area, Nenana, across the Alaska Ranger, right on up to just south of the Yukon River. Pretty good VFR, some higher pressure, Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, up into the Kuskokwim Valley, western Cook Inlet, and right up to the Brooks Range, and a narrow band of IFR there with a disturbance eastern Arctic coast. Becomes pretty widespread over the Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island, into the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, on down to the Pribilofs. Aleutian's looking pretty good for tomorrow, mostly VFR. Marginal VFR for the afternoon, Fox Islands, Western Alaska Peninsula. Thursday morning, a little bit of IFR slips on up to Unmak Island. Otherwise, staying VFR, Adak westward to Shimian at 2. And marginal VFR for the Pribilofs, back to VFR, St. Matthew Island, Nunivak Island, some IFR, and over the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. And a narrow band of IFR, St. Lawrence Island, northeastward there, just west of Nome, across the Seward Peninsula, into the northwest coast, all the way up, narrow band there, just east, around Aliktok there, eastern Arctic coast, and Yukon Flats, IFR, Copper River Basin, IFR, marginal VFR, Panhandle, North Gulf Coast, Kenai Peninsula. VFR continues to expand over south central Alaska into the afternoon Thursday. Some lingering marginal VFR for the, say, right around Valdez, up across the North Gulf Coast Range into the Wrangell Mountains, with VFR over the remainder of southern Alaska, some marginal VFR along the mid-Yukon River Valley area, and then toward the White Mountains, IFR along the eastern Brooks Range, western North Slope, narrow band there from the Arctic Ocean, extending down into the western Brooks Range, and then picking up again over the western Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island. Huge area of IFR spreading in over Adak, eastward to the Alaska Peninsula, and pushing northward to the Pribilofs. Southeast coast, look at that, VFR for the afternoon on Thursday, all the way up to Yakutat. And for Anaktuvuk and Adigan, past tomorrow for Anaktuvuk to start. VFR looking pretty good for Adigan as well. Lake Clark and Merrill becoming VFR. Could start out marginal early, but generally looking at a VFR kind of day for Lake Clark and Merrill. Rainy, marginal VFR to VFR by noon through the afternoon. Windy, IFR to start, becoming marginal VFR into the afternoon. Isabel, marginal VFR at times throughout the entire day, but Mentasta, VFR. Tanita, IFR. Portage, IFR. Chilkoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels at the surface back down just off the North Gulf Coast for tomorrow morning, cutting across the Panhandle east of Kodiak Island. Kind of quite a gradient there across the southeast coast, 2 to 6,000 foot freezing levels. And for icing, areas of isolated moderate from the northern Panhandle, eastern North Gulf Coast through the eastern interior there, from Copper River Basin right on up to the eastern Arctic coast. No icing threats back to the west. Southern Bering Sea Aleutians, very isolated moderate rime or mixed icing in areas there south of the Pribilofs to the western Alaska Peninsula. Jet stream with that thermal gradient over the Panhandle, that's where the jet max is, 170 to 175 knot west-southwest flow, keeping it in a wet weather pattern there, definitely in mild. Southwest 65 knots over the western interior. Cold upper trough there extending across, from Norton Sound down into the southwest Bering Sea. And at 9,000 feet, upper level low over the Yukon Delta. Northerlies 50 knots, Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island. Westerly 70 knots, Alaska Peninsula. And taking a look at turbulence, moderate chop for the Panhandle, south central Alaska, Kodiak Island.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and today I'm privileged to introduce Dr. Uccellini, the Director of the United States National Weather Service. Welcome back to Alaska, sir.
Thank you, Dave. Glad to be here.
Thanks. Prior to being the leader of the National Weather Service, your work included an extensive look at snowstorms across the northeastern United States. These are the types of storms that can bring some of the country's largest cities to its knees. Tell me a little bit about your fascination with snow.
Well, as far back as I can remember, I've always been interested in weather, growing up as a kid on Long Island, New York, and was particularly fascinated by snowstorms, why they occurred. The distribution of snow was very varied across the entire region, the rain-snow line, all those things fascinated me right from the get-go. And I was interested in knowing how they worked, how the forecast worked, or more often than not, didn't work one way or the other. And that drove me, that interest continued to build and drove me through high school right into college, wanting to be a meteorologist.
Oh, okay, that's a fascinating story, and I think every meteorologist has a weather story like that in some way.
Right.
Due to Alaska's size and proximity to the North Pole, sometimes it's difficult to detect and analyze the weather patterns over Alaska. What's the National Weather Service doing to improve that weather detection?
Well, observations in this type of environment is a big challenge, whether it's from space or from what we call in situ observations from the ground or within the systems. Clearly, satellites have been playing an increasing role in providing the big picture, not only from a visual sense in what you see is occurring, but also from providing the data for numerical models that then are used to actually predict the weather. Alaska is actually pretty well positioned with respect to polar orbiting satellites, since you get a faster return of those satellites over your particular area. And in fact, the polar satellite system is the backbone for the observations that we use in our models, especially our global models, and they're particularly important for observing weather features that affect Alaska.
Alaskans live and die by the weather every day, and one of the strategic goals of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Weather Service is to develop a more weather-ready nation. What does it mean for Alaskans to be weather-ready?
Well, the strategic outcome is based on people being ready, responsive, and therefore resilient to the increasing threats to extreme weather events. Those threats are related to not only the nature of the events, but the fact that we're becoming more vulnerable to them as we have more people, more infrastructure that could be affected by these events. So we have to ensure that the observations we make for situational awareness, the forecasts we make for people to take the proper responses, are connected to people's actions, the response to these events, so that they will be more resilient to what's facing them. You know, there are examples with respect to hurricanes. More people living along the coastline takes longer to evacuate. We have to make better forecasts with longer lead times, but we also have to communicate the threat so people will actually take action to avoid those storms. Up here you have, as in other parts of the United States, an increasing threat related to fire. As there are more people living in fire-prone areas, we have to ensure that our forecasts are good, that we don't have false alarms that make people not react to the forecast when in fact they should. But we also have to be able to communicate the threat and make sure that we're working with the partners in the emergency management community so that communities and right down to individuals will actually take the proper responses in the face of these events. So that's the strategic goal. There are a lot of challenges for us in terms of improving forecasts, but also improving our communication skills and linking with the emergency management communities that are actually out there trying to protect lives and mitigate property loss.
So a huge partnership effort going forward.
That's one of the important keys for the success of meeting the strategic goal.
Okay. Well, one of the things you're talking about was understanding the weather information we're getting back from the computers, weather modeling, and you did a lot of work with that in some of your prior positions with the Environmental Prediction Center there, the National Center for Environmental Prediction. What can you tell us about recent improvements in that weather modeling? And you were using the polar orbiters as kind of a source of information that started that process.
Well, you know, first of all, we have to recognize that everything you see, you read and hear about weather, climate, or ocean forecasts are all driven by numerical models. Now, it really has been the revolution in our forecast process in the last part of the 20th century. The success of that numerical enterprise is based on three factors: big computers, global data, not just local data, but you have to have a global data set, and then the models themselves, the science that's behind the models and in running the models in an operational mode. So we're working to improve all three of those components. We upgraded our computers last year. We're going through another upgrade even as I speak. We'll be upgrading from 200 trillion calculations per second to 700 trillion calculations per second by January of 2015. This increase in the computer will allow us to run what we call Earth system models. It's not just the atmosphere, it's the atmosphere, ocean, ice, which is obviously very important up here, and land models that are all coupled together at higher resolution. So you need the big computers, you need the science that allows us to run these models and run them in a parallel mode, and that they're coupled so that the ocean effects could affect the atmosphere and vice versa, as an example. And then the global observations are absolutely critical, and over the last 20, 30 years they've become more dependent upon the satellite systems, and especially the polar orbiting satellites, which help drive the observations needed for those models, whether they be atmospheric observations, land, ice observations. We're deriving more and more of that from satellites now that feed into these models and produce forecasts with extended lead times. Now out, for extreme events especially, we're seeing much improved forecast out in the 4, 5, 6, 7, and even 8-day range, which gets us back to Weather Ready Nation, because if you're going to get ready for a storm event, you want those consistent forecasts approaching that event from day 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, so you can take the actions several days in advance that can help mitigate the property loss and protect your livelihood.
Okay, all part of the mission of protecting life and property. Dr. Uccellini, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and speaking to Alaskans and sharing how the National Weather Service is working for Alaska and the nation. Wish you safe travels around the 49th. Enjoy your time here, sir. And for Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Small craft advisory, south coast of the Panhandle, outer coastline, southwest 30 knots, seas around 20 feet. And gale warnings on the north coast, south to southwest 30 to 35 knots, and again seas around 20 feet. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, northern inner channel is pretty windy, south sustained 30 knots, gale force gust of 45 knots. And south 30 knots for Stevens Passage, small craft advisories for Clarence Strait, southeast winds 25 knots, 14-foot seas. And for Thursday, there we go. South winds, or winds coming down along the coast there, south 20 knots, but seas still up there around 20 feet. And for the north coast, small craft advisory, south to southeast at 25. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, northern inner channel, south winds 25 knots. And Stevens Passage, south at 20. Clarence Strait, southeast winds 15 knots, seas 3 feet. Prince William Sound, gale warnings out for tomorrow. Southeast winds 35 knots, seas up to 7 feet. Gales also for the North Gulf Coast, west-southwest 40 to 45 knots, seas just under 20 feet. And for the Barren Islands, northwest 45 knots, seas around 20 feet, and west 45 knots. Pretty good gale there for the Kamishak Bay area, seas 16 feet. Good gale Southern Cook Inlet, southwest at 40 knots, right up to the Forelands there, 12-foot seas. North of the Forelands, southwest at 20. On Thursday, Cook Inlet, brisk wind advisories, northwest winds 30 knots, and gale warnings for Kamishak Bay, but down to 35 knots. Minimum gales now out of the north 35. Barren Islands, southeast 35 knots. And for the North Gulf Coast, southerly winds 30 to 35 knots, 16 to 21-foot seas. Lighter winds in the forecast for Prince William Sound Thursday, east at 20 knots, seas down to 3 feet. Kodiak Island, gale warnings, west-northwest 40 knots, higher gusts, seas up to 20 feet. And gale warnings Sitkinak to Castle Cape, northwest 35 knots. Gale warnings Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula, winds southwest at 35, 8-foot seas. Bristol Bay, west winds at 20 knots. And for Thursday, Alaska Peninsula, gale warnings, east-northeast, 35 to 40 knots, depending on which side of the peninsula you're on. Northwest, 30-knot winds for Bristol Bay. Gale warnings, Kodiak Island, southeast winds 40 knots on the east side. Shelikof Strait looking at a northeast wind at 35 knots. On Alaska Island tomorrow, southwest 25 to 30 knots. Unmak Island, west winds diminishing to 15 to 20 knots. Light winds for Adak and Atka, Amchitka, Shimianatu, all from generally a north direction at 15 knots. Seas running 7 to 12 feet. And for Thursday, winds pick up. Small craft advisory, Shimiatakiska, north 25 knots. Amchitka Island, north at 30 knots. Seas building toward 20 feet. And minimum gales for Adak and Atka, northeast 35 knots. And 30 to 40 knot winds for the Fox Islands from the north and northeast. Seas running 14 to 18 feet. Southwest coast, Kuskokwim Delta coast, southern Nunivak Island, variable winds 15 knots. Yukon Delta coast west at 15. Brisk wind advisory, St. Lawrence Island, winds north at 25. Northwest winds 25 knots for the Pribilofs, and north at 20 for St. Matthew Island. Then those winds pick up again for the Pribilofs, north sustained 30 knots, 30 knot northerlies for the Kuskokwim Delta coast, northeast at 20. St. Matthew Island and Yukon Delta coast north at 20. Lightening up there, St. Lawrence Island into Norton Sound, northwest 15 knots, and in the Sound southwest at 10. Gale warnings for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, 35 knots, Kaktovik demarcation point. Otherwise, brisk wind advisories for the east side there. Central coast northeast at 20, west side north 15. Brisk wind advisories, Cape Beaufort to Wales, north 25 to 30 knots. Those turn northwest and fall back to 20 knots from Wales to Cape Beaufort on Thursday. Light winds for the western and central coast, 10 knots north-northwest direction, and west-southwest at 20 knots for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. For tonight, pretty good storm tracks north just east of Kodiak Island. So rain and snow, or just snow depending on your elevation, going to be right on the edge there for the Kodiak State Airport area. Otherwise, snow into south central Alaska, Copper River Basin, but lighter amounts north of the Alaska Range up over the eastern interior, and snow and blowing snow not too bad over the western Brooks Range area with lightening up winds. Widespread area snow showers and light snow, clouds, southern Bering Sea, and Aleutians. And for tomorrow, rain heavy at times and heavy wind moves in, especially the central and northern panhandle. Colder air pulls back into the Cook Inlet, south central Alaska area with snow and increasing north and northwest winds. Cold over the western interior. Storm pushes snow into the southern Bering Sea.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go fly. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.